Well, that means that you can hear me talk but not hear me breathe, because hearing me breathe is weird. That seems like that works now? Cool. Hi again. I've done a quick introduction for the people in the room, but for Panopto Gang, hi, I'm Katie. I am a fourth year PhD student here, Jesus Christ. But I also did my undergrad here as an integrated master's. I did my undergrad from 2017 to 2021, and you might notice that at the end of that is when it was the pandemic. So I did do my project during the pandemic, so there may be things that are a bit different now, partly because it was 4 years ago and the school reserves the right to have change in 4 years. It doesn't use that right very often, but it does have the right. But also, like, there's going to be changes because of the ability to, physically see people and meet in person, which, when I was doing my final year project, wasn't particularly illegal. And then it was, but I still didn't do it. Just as an overview of what, if I can click, there we go. Just as an overview of what I'm going to be doing, that's a lot of points. We're going to get through them quite quickly, I hope. So starting off with just how to get started with your project, because I presume that most people watching, listening here and the recording are final year students. We're going to start with the stuff that's useful for you here now with the situation you're already in, and then go back later to things that are useful in theory for second years who think they don't need to think about this yet because they've got an entire year la-di-da-di-da. So we're going to start with getting started as like a final year student. Then we're going to go a bit into the literature and why literature is important and why you're going to spend your entire first term reading and planning. Then we'll talk about some of the easy pitfalls of VR in particular, because there are some with a final year project. We're going to talk a bit about like what equipment and software you will need and how to get access to that sort of thing. Then we'll go into like some more general details of how to make a good project, how to make a project that will get you the good marks that you want, because isn't that what we're here for? We're meant to be here for the joy of learning in academia, but I'm going to be real. Then I'm going to talk about some of the special considerations you have to have for your demo with a VR project, because you do have to give a demo at the end of your project to someone, and what you have to consider for that. Then I'm going to go back in time a bit to things I should have told you months ago, how to pick your supervisor for any second years or integrated masters third years, being proactive and listening now, or remembering back now when it's going to be like March next year, remembering, oh hey, this exists, quick, let's go find it. Hi to the future, if you're one of those. And then I'm going to talk a bit, I'm going to nerd out a bit at the end about how if you do a VR project, you can then expand that to a PhD, and just for funsies, talk a little bit about my PhD. So yeah, let's get started. We're getting started. This is not an official classification, this is just my personal classification. There's really two major types of VR projects in my mind. There's technical VR projects and HCI VR projects. Technical ones care about the actual VR itself and cares about like looking into how you can program things to do fun tricks with VR. An example of this one is when I did my undergrad, one of the people who I shared a supervisor with, one of my supervisors, that was complicated, he was looking at the idea of touch in VR and like the idea of firmness and softness and how you can do tricks involving haptics and vibrations and how to code it so that people feel different stiffnesses. Something like that is a technical VR project. It's things where you are looking at trying to get a technical output from like code that you're writing. This can also include AI projects. So like if you're trying to code a particular AI to work particularly well in VR for various reasons, such as like computer vision, like helping with eye tracking, like that sort of thing, that's more of a technical project. I didn't do one of those. Those are scary. I did a HCI project, which is short for human-computer interaction. It's the idea being that you are essentially doing a human-computer interaction project, but for various reasons, you have chosen that VR is the best tool to use for your HCI, for your goals. goals. Technical, I find, is better done with I say external there. I wrote this presentation before I found out that Max is actually an internal supervisor now. Is he? He said last week. Yeah, but like, if you're doing technical stuff, oddly enough, you're better off leaving computer science to do it. You're better off working with like Max over at the VR lab, or working with the people in Sportex, because basically they have projects which are basically like, we've done all of the like people stuff. We need computer scientists to help with all the technical stuff. And so if you do those projects, you will end up like doing that sort of thing. But I'll get to that later. Honestly, HI can be done with any supervisor. You're better off with a supervisor who actually does HI, like I have. My main supervisor is, I chose for his HI specialism rather than anything in particular in VR. Basically, the rule for any of them is communicate. Talk to your supervisor. Don't do it how I did, which was I went in guns blazing, I am going to do this project or I will fight you. And then they took a step back and was like, Katie, why are you threatening to fight us? I'm happy with you doing that project. But you do, if you want to do VR, you will have to, it is worth it to have a clear explanation of why do you think your project is better for being in VR? Because making your project in VR does make it a bit more complicated in terms of just everything. Because you have to deal with hardware, you have to deal with, the FAFI that I'm going to talk about later. But there are genuinely projects that do benefit from VR. You just have to have a good reason why you want to do it in VR and be able to explain it. If the answer is because I want to do a VR project, that's what I want to do, then that's perfectly fine. Just explain to your supervisor that. Don't be like, just be honest. But yeah. Moving on. Can I have mouse control as a tweet? Yeah. So some easy pitfalls. So basically, oh hey, I missed a, yeah, I did miss that. Yeah. So now let's show them why it's important. This is making a final year project. This is not coding for fun. If you want to code a VR project just for the fun of it, you can just code a VR project. VR Society will probably help you with that. This is your final year project, and one thing that's important to remember is you are doing a research project. You are not doing a programming test, you are doing a research project. Which means that you want to back things up with literature. You need to have the readings. It will also help you when you're going to your supervisor and justifying the VR if you have these papers saying, look, these are a bunch of papers that say that VR is really good for this. I want to do something like this, but I want to expand it in some way. So basically, yeah, you will spend a large chunk of your first time reading. I didn't touch Unity, the program I used to program my project, until December. And that was the last couple of weeks of term. This part of your year is going to be a lot of reading. It is going to be a lot of planning. And that's really good, because it means that when you start programming, you will know what you're programming. But yeah, so make sure, and Google Scholar. Google Scholar will be your best friend. Also, I didn't include in the presentation, but I really should have, Zotero is your best friend. What is Zotero? I'm guessing you guys know what Google Scholar is. It's just a special version of Google that only gives you academic articles, so then you're citing papers and you're not citing someone's random opinion on the internet. But Zotero is a source management tool, which means that basically you can install it, you can install the little extension for your web browser, you get to click a button and have it make the references for you. And then you don't have to faff around with them, because we hate writing references and we don't want to do them. So it doesn't have to be Zotero, there's other options like Mendeley. There's probably other options if you Google them. I'm sure there's someone out there has a strong opinion on some ultimately correct open source program for this, because we're in computer science, of course they do. But Zotero, Mendeley, any of them, they will be able to produce you what's called, if you're using Overleaf to write your report, which I honestly recommend, if you take the time to learn it, it does make things easier. Zotero. Zotero. Yeah. Which Anyway, I do recommend taking the time to learn LaTeX and write it up in Overleaf. Overleaf is good because it's backing it up on an external server, so you don't have the, oh god, it is the last week and I've accidentally dropped my laptop into the canal and lost everything issue with your final year report. Then you can basically import a BibTeX from Zotero into it, and then it will just you'll do a bit of write coding, and then surprise! You don't have to faff around with references. Or there is also a Word extension that does the same thing just without the programming, because Microsoft would never let you touch code and touch their precious code. Also, as part of this, planning is your friend. I mentioned that you aren't going to be really programming this term until right at the end, but you can't read all term, obviously, you'll run out of things to read. Also what you're going to be doing this term is mostly about planning. It's designing your software, it's planning what you're going to put in it, and it will be discussed also in a bit. But yeah, next slide. Easy pitfalls. Coding in Unity is relatively easy. Unless you are trying to make it do absolute tricks, which you can, and if you're doing a project, that technical project, you probably will. But the baseline coding to have a VR program is not as difficult as it sounds. It is mostly importing libraries and changing settings in Unity. Do not expect the fact that you made a VR program to be shiny enough to automatically get you the technical competency stuff to get good marks. You're going to want to include some stuff that is complicated, that is not necessarily complicated, but is actually challenging and shows off your coding abilities. Even if it's just a little thing, I just had a part of my code that was just greatly over-programmed, you put your hand in it and move, and then it changes the sound based off where your hand is, kind of deal, which was complicated as hell, because it automatically it generated the sound itself, but it meant that I had that technical competency in there to show off. Don't make it the backbone of your project that I can program a VR program, because it is not difficult enough to make it an entire project. You are going to want to add that extra thing to it, whether it is going down the technical path of I have looked at computer vision and eye tracking, or I've looked at hand tracking and making hand tracking more precise, or I have looked into how if you want to go down the HI track of I have shown how this reduces user anxiety, I have shown how this trying to come up with examples off the top of my head, how this has benefited users. I have done user questionnaires, I have done user studies, I have treated this as a full HI project. VR is just the way that I've gotten to that. If you are not with an external, equipment and software. Here is the awful truth. If you are not with an external supervisor, or if you're not in the VR lab, you will likely need your own headset. It is very unlikely that any given supervisor will have a VR headset that they can lend you. I know that I know that at least one is equally high, has one, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he can just give it out because it's through my funding. So if you want to do a VR project with a supervisor who is an internal supervisor who does not typically work with VR, you will likely be using your own hardware. The uni just does not have the hardware to give out, basically. And also, I don't think they would particularly, because it's a liability issue of what if it breaks, what if it electrocutes people, what if you throw it in the canal. There are better and worse headsets for this. The priority, having a headset. Personally, I used a Quest for mine because my mum was absolutely lovely and gave it to me as a 21st birthday present. Because he knew that I was becoming one of those people, research was becoming my life, and so he wanted to support me in that. And anyway, it doesn't matter. Preferably not the mobile phone ones, unless you are very much doing a HCI project that is discussing mobile phone headsets in particular. If you're trying to do a technical one, you're going to probably want a proper VR headset. But yeah, no, to counter what I just said, if you're doing a HLI project, honestly, I could see it working with one of those, like, you put your phone in ones, but just be aware that it will be hard to show technical competency with those just because of how limited they are. And then for actual programs, I use Unity. I will always argue for Unity. There is another program that you can use. I forgot the name off the top of my head, but that's another games tech program.
Unreal?
Huh?
Unreal?
Yeah. Like, you can use Unreal Engine. I don't. I made that decision, like, 5 years ago, and, like, 4 or 5 years ago, and just have stuck to it. There's no particular reason I prefer it. Like, I haven't done, like, a comparative thing to determine the best. I just went with, well, I found more tutorials for Unity. I guess I'm using Unity. But, yeah, so you are going to end up using game dev engines for that, which does involve a lot of drag and drop stuff, which is why I said don't expect it to be technically competent, naturally, because it's a lot of drag and drop. And one of the good things about Unity is that it can be learned on the go with your pre-existing Java skills. It doesn't use Java. It just doesn't. What it does use is C#, which, as I like to call it, Microsoft Java. The programming languages are very similar to the point where you will not struggle at all converting between those two languages. And also, there's a lot of stuff that could get very complicated to program. Like, if you want to have, like, a user avatar, or if you want to have, like, hand tracking, that could get very complicated to program. If you are doing a HCI project, or you are doing, like, a project about a set thing, you do not have time for that. You do, as much as I said, like, this is going to be, like, programmatically easy, you could get yourself absolutely in the weeds if you try to program everything yourself, just because, like, there is so much to it, and, like, you will spend so much time reinventing the wheel. Don't spend all that time reinventing the wheel. Find libraries. There are plenty of libraries out there for VR. OpenXR is the one that I use for my PhD work, actually, because it's basically it just gives you all the tools to have a model and get going. One thing to remember is that if you're using, like, a Quest or a Rift or, like, some sort of similar like Oculus device, it will be very tempting, and everyone will tell you to use the default Oculus library, which would be great if you're on a Windows machine. If you're on an Apple machine, it will completely crash your Unity, and you will spend months trying to figure out why. I did that. It's because the audio drivers don't work. The entire thing doesn't work because of audio drivers, but it just means that basically if you have an Apple device, don't try and use Oculus, don't go out and buy a new computer, just use OpenXR or a similar open source library and just get going. Like, you do not need all of the bells and whistles of the Oculus library, you will be fine. And I say libraries, like, there's a lot of libraries. They're on the Oculus store, they're on the Unity store if you're using Unity. I'm almost certain that Unreal has its own separate but basically identical thing. Some of them will be like, hey, we can do hand tracking for you really well if you pay us money. Why are you paying money? You're already paying thousands of pounds to go to university. You don't need to pay for a hand tracking library as well. Don't pay money for libraries. There is no library that I have found that is worth it to actually spend the money on, as opposed to just spending the time to figure out and use a free library. Just don't spend money on your project. That's dumb. So, how to make a good project. And this is now generic for basically any project, actually. Have a timeline. I found it really helped for my project to, like, when my supervisor was like, I want a timeline for, and I want it, like, your timeline done by the time you have to give your master's, like, integrated master's presentation on your project. I was like, but I hate timelines. I hate figuring out when I want to get stuff done. It was the most useful thing I had, and I highly recommend it. But also, make sure that timeline has room for error. Don't say, I am going to get this thing done on this day exactly, and if I do not get it done on this day, I will fail my entire project. Do not let it get to that. Because you are going to have bad weeks. You are going to have weeks where you are ill. You are going to have weeks where one of your modules, like all of your modules have been daft and put a huge, you have each put a huge assignment due on the same day. You are going to have weeks where you are having to fist fight project members to get their work done, god damn it. You are going to have weeks that you just can't. Sometimes that happens for reason upon reason upon reason. And you're going to want that flexibility built in at the start. So when you're planning your project, remember that you are a human being and plan accordingly. And also, like I said, I didn't start actually programming until the second to last, third to last week of term. Because I took the time to plan, and that made it work. You need to make sure that by the time you are putting your hand onto that Unity program, you know what features you want, and you know what features, more importantly, you know what features you don't want. Like, you can change it later, but once you start programming, I would not add any more features unless it is blindingly obvious you have missed something vital. Because feature creep can happen. Feature creep will happen. You will think, oh, but I could just add another thing. Oh, I could just add another thing. Oh, what do you mean I've got 5 minutes left to write the entire report? Stick to your plan. Especially with like VR projects, it can be so easy just to be like, oh, but it's just a drag and drop thing, and then you spend 5 hours debugging the silly little code that you added, and it's not worth it. But yeah, also remember that the report is a large part of the process. Remember that the report is actually an important part of the final year project. Because I remember last couple of weeks, oh God, I haven't started my report. I'm going to have to pull 5 all-nighters to get this done. You don't want to pull all-nighters. I technically had to pull 1 all-nighter in my entire degree, but that was due to technical issues of the the thing to upload not working, and I could have just left it overnight, but I was paranoid, so I was waking up in the middle of the night to check that it was uploading properly. You do not need to pull all-nighters to do your final year project. You shouldn't need to pull all-nighters to get your project done if you start your project right up early. I'd say about a month before. It doesn't matter if you haven't finished your project by the time you start writing it up. Because you can start writing up the parts that you've already done, the literature you've read, the early development stages, the stuff that you've already done. You can start writing those up while you finish off the last parts of your program, or the last parts of your user research. But make sure that you start writing it early. Also, when you are planning stuff, when you are reading stuff, make notes then, because you will think you will remember this. You will not. You will not remember what you thought about a particular thing you read in November when it's February, when it's March, when it's April, and and deadlines are bearing down on you, and you are looking at the end of your degree. You will not have that good of a memory. Make sure to keep those notes, keep them safe in just a Google Docs form folder, or whatever you use to manage your files. That isn't my throw it in a pile. Don't do as I say, not as I do. But because then it makes write-up easier, because then when it comes to the write-up period, all you have to do is be like, oh yeah, so I've got my outline. Oh hey, I've already got that. Yeet. You can just throw it in. And then you'll have a lot of the report already done. You will just have to neaten it up and turn it into academic writing and not that guy's absolutely wrong, screw that guy, he's completely wrong about how this works. You don't have to make them formal notes. You just have to have notes. But yeah. Now for some more practical considerations about VR. Screenshots from Unity. You can use them in your final year project to show what you've done. VR projects tend to be quite visual. Take advantage of that. Have pictures. Show off how cool your stuff looks, because it will look cool because you were the one who did it. And you seem like cool people. Alternatively, most VR headsets have some way in your program to actually take screen caps. Use it, figure out how you can transfer them over, and then just use that to show off. That's just how it works. When you're writing up also, remember to define stuff. a lot of like VR is one of those things that isn't heavily studied in the university, so it is worthwhile to like define everything you're doing, because and also VR like to common people has a very obvious definition. It's the headset stuff. Virtual reality in academia has a slightly different definition, which isn't necessarily the headsets, like the immersive virtual reality. It can also mean like screens. It can also mean being in a room where things are projected on the walls. You'll want to make it clear that you are what sort of VR you are using, basically, because it gets you marks at the end of the day. So also, if you're crossing over with other areas like I did, because I crossed over with like a bunch of psychology ideas, because honestly, if you get deep enough into HR, you realise that it is psychology with computer science flavoured tape on it. Remember to define those terms as well, and assume, if it is not computer science, assume that your marker knows absolutely nothing about it. It just makes your life easier. Remember to figure out how you're demonstrating before your demo. There's two main ways to do that, really, that I found. The first one is the simplest. Hey, supervisor, hey, person marking my work, here's the headset, would you like to try it on? Would you like to try my program? This is the one for if you genuinely trust that your program won't have any errors. It's dangerous, but it does show off. If you do have the risk of, if you click this wrong thing in this wrong order, then things will explode. Or if you are like me and couldn't physically hand it to them because it was illegal. I don't think it actually was illegal, but like I was not leaving my house and they were not leaving their house, and that makes it slightly impossible. What you can do is a lot of headsets, or at least the Oculus Quest, which I was using, offer a streaming service. You can stream to a device from a headset. The setup is a little complicated, but you can do it. And then you can just show it on a screen, or screen share. You can just show it on a screen to your supervisor. And that means that you get more control over what they see, which is always nice. By doing that, you can do it that way. Just make sure that you get everything installed and set up to do that before your demo, because you do not want to, you have a set amount of demo time. You do not want to be wasting time that you could be using, showing off how cool your work is, faffing around with technology, because that's annoying. And yeah, practice your demo. Like, this is for any project, but particularly in VR, practice what you're going to show them. Practice booting up your headset, practice showing it to another person, because VR projects are one of the more complicated ones to show, and you're going to want to have that practice and be confident, because you're going to be nervous going in anyway. May as well not add more anxiety. Picking a supervisor. Honestly, I'd say Max DeLuca is the winner for this one if you can get him. This is more for the third years now, and like the second years now, and like the not final years, and the people who are watching this now that it is the future and problems are coming. Max DeLuca really is, honestly, I think, the best supervisor for this. Otherwise, you are going to want to consider other aspects of your project. Honestly, like any HCI researcher, you can't particularly go wrong with. I had two supervisors for my project because I was awkward and socially anxious. I'm less so now, because I basically got my supervisor through the system that you get supervisors through, got Mohammed, then I got an email from Max saying, hey, I'm looking for students. Emailed him, got approved to be with him, emailed my Mohammed to be like, hey, I have another supervisor. And he interpreted it as, you have two supervisors, and I was too nervous to correct him. That's how you accidentally end up with two supervisors, by being awkward. I do not suggest that one. I suggest being aware that that there are like external supervisors, and also like actually following the process for that, rather than just kind of making up as you go along. But I have a strange life. Anyway, internal versus external supervisors. Like I said multiple times throughout this, most of the time you're going to end up with an internal supervisor. You're going to end up with like a HI researcher, you're going to end up with an AI researcher. You might end up with a security researcher because we have a lot of those and they sometimes have to suffer. But there is often the option to have an external supervisor. I don't think they're applied to in the normal way because what they will do is they will send sneaky emails once you've got your supervisor being like, hey, so if you didn't like your supervisor and want to do cool VR stuff, contact sports and exercise science and we will do cool VR stuff with you. Basically the process for that is meant to be you email them, you get permission, you tell your other supervisor and admin that you are moving to a sports X supervisor and you change supervisor. Don't either do or don't do what I did, which would get too socially awkward to say that you'd like to reject your supervisor and like then end up with two supervisors. It worked well for me. It was a lot more admin because I was having to report to two different people who had completely separate priorities, but it worked for me. But it really depends on what you want more. Whether you want it to be like you want simple like set goals or whether you want it to be that like you are juggling those priorities. I found it fun. I am a strange person. Anyway, expanding to a PhD. So now I'm going to be a nerd because I can. I am actually a PhD student. I have stepped on stuff that is not mine. I'm a PhD student, and I came straight from my undergrad to a PhD. How did I do it? Well, I wouldn't do it the way I did it. I would do it a way that doesn't have so much social anxiety attached, which is the story of my life. Just talk to your supervisor. If you are interested in doing a PhD, talk to your supervisor. Especially if you're interested in doing a PhD that continues what you're currently working on as your undergraduate project, talk to your supervisor. Because, honestly, the part that is applying for the actual university, that's a checkbox exercise. That's just the important part that they care about is that you have an academic interested in working with you. And if you have a supervisor, there's already one who's been at least interested to work with you for a year. Talk to them, see if they're interested for longer. They might say no, in which case you would have to go and start talking to other academics, but in my experience, he said yes. He was interested in me continuing my work. This, by the way, tends to be helped by you doing the stuff that I mentioned previously, having a good plan and following it and doing steady work week by week. If you show that you are a good student, good researcher, and you have those baseline skills through your final year project, that means that they're more likely to look at that and be like, yes, I think I can I'm willing to work with the student for 3 or 4 more years for them to produce a larger project because they have shown to me that they have the skills set to do this. Like, you are more likely to have issues if, like, you go and be like, I didn't do anything this week, I don't care. Showing that you care and are passionate about your subject is one of the best ways to do it. There are a myriad of ways to get funded for a PhD. We are in computer science. We are quite lucky. At least, I don't know whether things have changed since I did mine, but we are quite lucky in that we are in computer science, which is one of the better funded subjects. There is internal funding at the university. The way I got funding was basically being nervous for a bit, mentioning it to someone, and someone being like, hey, why don't you just email the funding department? And I did. And audacity prevailed. I think in my year there was about like 25 internal PhD things to give to like pay for your PhD. They tend to have quite a few. It's just a lot easier if you can and basically it's that if you apply for a PhD through the university for a PhD, you will be automatically considered for one of these. And as someone who's already at the university and probably already has a good track record, you have a pretty good chance of getting one of these. So it is worth trying for that first before you try anything else. So now I've talked a little bit about it, but my path to a PhD was basically, when I was in my second year, I was on a year in industry program to start with. And then I started looking at jobs and I was like, these all terrify me and I don't want to do this yet. So in my third year, I took an unfortunately now deleted module, which let you do a bit of research, called Individual Study, which let you basically write a huge lit review. And I did it on virtual reality for autism. And I was like, that seems to be a huge gap in the research here. Just this massive gap where it's for like sensory stuff. What if I started to fill that gap? So I did my final year project on the idea of like sensory rooms in virtual reality. I wasn't allowed to do it for people with autism because they don't like you particularly doing like doing final year projects that involve vulnerable populations, just because it is so difficult to get ethical reviews for that, and also it's hard to find participants. Just because, and like they don't want to particularly be letting undergraduates, potentially cause mental health issues to vulnerable populations, because that is morally bad. Don't do that. But I did that, and then, like I said, oh god, this is where I admit something awkward. I admitted to a drunk PhD student that I wanted to do a PhD, and he, while still drunk, sent a recommendation email to my supervisor. I don't advise this method. I advise just talking to your supervisor, but then in the next meeting with my supervisor, he was like, Katie, why didn't you just talk to me? I'm perfectly happy with you doing that. Just apply for it. You do then have to go onto the website and do the application, but that's just paperwork. And yeah, so now my research is I get to do a virtual reality PhD, which is awesome. I'm looking into how virtual reality can be used to emulate sensory rooms to reduce anxiety in adults with autism. So basically, sensory rooms are basically the space where there's a bunch of items that, like lights and like balls and like bubble tubes, which are basically just big tubes of like bubbles that go up and down and they light up and they are really cool. I basically made one of those in VR, and now I'm going to just get a bunch of people to use it and see if it reduces their anxiety through complicated pre-post test anxiety testing. If you have to go, see ya. It's not that complicated. You just have to be set in what you want to do. And if you're the sort of person who's like turning up to this talk, then I guess.
Oh, I have a question. If you want to be a C program, do you have to do a master's before you can do a PhD?
No, I did an integrated master's, but that's because I wanted to put off making choices. The worst reason to do a master's. I have a friend who is in the security department, actually, who went straight from a BSc with a year abroad into a PhD. If you want to do a PhD more generally, there is another path that I didn't mention because you will not particularly find it for VR PhDs, which tend to be your own projects. There will be advertised projects. Normally in security, I think sometimes there's AI ones. But you can go on the website and they'll have like a list of projects that they're currently funding, and you can apply to them. It's basically like applying to a job, and then you will get a PhD to work on. The difference is, if you do it that way, you will get a PhD to work on that specific thing. You will not get to pick what you work on. If you apply through the internal funding scheme, you will have more control over what you are studying, which is why I chose it, because I was 3 years ago I was both shyer and yet somehow more feral, and I was like, I want to do this research subject or nothing, hence why I went for the internal funding. Luckily that worked out for me. Just to round up, there are many factors to consider at this stage. Mostly, what am I going to read, and what do I want to have? Start with your questions. Start with what do you want to do? Why do you want to do in VR? What kind of thing are you going to answer to make it a technical project that it is also a research project? Keeping organised can just be just as important as technical ability. I will admit, I was not the most technically competent student in my year. And yet, here I am, 4th year PhD student. Keeping organised, really important. It's the same I don't do it now, but especially for your final year project, you do want to keep organised, because this will be probably your first project where you've had to do such a big project with minimal support. Like, yeah, you've had assignments before, but like often like they've been quite like they've been a few weeks. This is a year-long project, and like your supervisor will ask, if you have like a more hands-off supervisor like I did, you'll be asked how you're doing and what you're planning on doing next, and you will get help with that. But it is on you to decide what you want to do and when you want to do it. And yeah, they can be really fun and interesting and exciting to explore. It's genuinely worthwhile doing one. It does let you, the moment where I put on the VR headset and found that I finally got the hands to work and I was in a room that I had made myself was genuinely powerful to experience. So yeah, it will make things trickier. I think it's worth it. Does anyone have any questions?
What was your undergrad project on?
My undergraduate project was on, I basically emulated sensory rooms to see how they reduced anxiety in adults who didn't have autism, basically. Like neurotypical population, as I called it, but that's basically people who don't have autism or other similar neurodivergencies. It found that it worked because, oddly enough, when people are very stressed, this is during the pandemic, if you say to them, hey, put on this headset for 15 minutes and hang out in a chill room where there's pretty lights and bubbles, they tend to get calmer. Yeah. Yeah, so basically I don't have slides for this, but to give a quick recap of the complicated slides I had if I chose to go more into it. So basically there's a theory of sensory processing that's called Dunn's model. The idea is that everyone has a certain threshold for sensory input. So like they like a certain amount of light. You like enough light to see, you don't like to have a flashlight glaring in your face. You like there to be music on. You don't like there to be 10 different types of music blaring loudly. So for each sense, there's a threshold, which means that like you can either have a high threshold, which means that you are completely chill with really loud noises and actually really enjoy loud noises, or you can have a very low threshold where like the sound of like people talking in the room can be overwhelmingly loud for you. I like to say for every other sense. And then there's another axis, which is active versus passive, which is, so what are you going to do about it? Passive people tend to just put up with their sensory thresholds being ignored more than people who are active. Active tends to cause like the more stereotypical behaviour associated with autism, like the idea of like having your hand over your ears, or like wanting to, or like just like yelling because everyone needs to just stop being too much. But basically the idea is that because autism causes people to be on basically farther on that scale than most people, than like neurotypical people. And the idea of a sensory room is that it's an area where that sort of sensory stimuli can be controlled, and especially for people who like want sensory input, the idea is that they can like quite easily get it, but also it's a space where they have control over their own space, which is rare in life. You don't normally get to control how much light there is in the room. You don't normally get to control how loud the room is. So it's just like that space where it's like, this is my space. I can play around with stuff as much as I want. No one is going to try and tell me what to do here. I can just mess with the things in here and have a nice chill time, and no one is going to bother me. It's basically the theory behind it, along with like the sensory theory aspect to it. Yeah. So basically, the theory behind what I'm doing is based off the theory of telepresence, which is the idea that VR can be realistic enough to basically put you into a different space entirely, which means that then you are in that VR sensory room, which means that you can then get the benefits of a sensory room without having to be in a physical sensory room, because those massively expensive. Also impractical. Most people don't have room in their house for a sensory room. Most community centres and schools don't have a space for it. So yeah, that's my research. Yeah, does anyone else have any other questions?
Did you use AI in your project at all? Creating like a personalized sensory experience?
I didn't, mostly because to be blunt, I didn't have time. This is going back to what I said about you need to be strict about what you are and aren't including, because it can be so easy just to throw a bunch of stuff in. I do have some stuff where I've discussed a theoretical, theory of using it. The problem is that currently there exists 2-3 research papers on the concept of using sensory rooms in VR at all, and those are focused on the idea of them being used for people with developmental disorders in a residential facility, whereas there's currently no research at all about whether it works for autistic people who exist outside of that sort of residential facility and don't have the comorbid developmental conditions. So basically it's yeah, in theory, it would be awesome to add AI. In practice, we need to know whether the baseline works before we start adding new stuff on top of it, which would have been my research if I had more time, but I don't. So they will stop paying me. So yeah. Any other questions? Did you guys enjoy the talk?
Yeah, that was really informative.
Thank you.